Hey everyone, welcome. My name is Megan and I'm so glad that you're here with me today. I'm the owner of Paint and Sip VT and you are going to be painting with Megan today. Today's class we are going to paint a nice framed composition with some overflowing simplistic flowers. This painting is a great option for any skill level. You could use basic supplies and it's quite calming and meditative. So I hope you enjoy the class today. I'll go ahead and walk you through some of the supplies that you'll need. I'm going to be using acrylic paints today. And all you need really is the basic primary colors. You need yellow, red, and blue. If you have black and white, those are also useful to lighten and darken, create shaded colors of those given hues. Red, blue, and red. Red, blue, and yellow, excuse me. So then, if you have additional colors like oranges or purples or greens, if you have one of those paint sets with lots of colors, you can always bring those to these classes. But as long as you have those basic colors, I can actually teach you how to blend any color and any shade or tone from those basic things. So that's a great starting point. And you don't have to buy the fancy paints. You can really use whatever you have. So grab whatever paints you have on hand, and you'll need a set of brushes. For my classes, I like to keep it really easy. I like to use, I call these the bigger brushes. If you wanted to get a larger brush than this, larger than 1 inch or larger than a half an inch, you could for those large coverage areas, no problem. I also recommend you have like a medium sized brush, so something that's a half an inch or less for those, more detailed areas, but for you to still maintain some good coverage to fill in areas for larger objects per se. And then I always ask that you have a smaller detailed brush, something with like a nice fine point for you to get those nice small details. You can get really tiny brushes. You can decide as the artist on how really particular you want to get with your brushes. But if you have those 3 basic brushes, you're going to do great in all of my classes, okay? So in my classes, I'll always encourage you to be yourself, bring your own ideas, and don't worry, don't stress. I love facilitating this stress-free environment. Once you get into the process of creating, you can breathe, your shoulders relax, and you can really just enjoy the experience. So welcome, I'm so glad you're here, and we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. In addition to your brushes and your paints, you'll also need a few other things for today's class. You're gonna need something to paint on. Today I'm using 11 by 14 canvas paper. If you wanted to use acrylic, canvas boards, canvas panels, you could do that. You could buy full-on canvases that are stretched on wooden frames. You can paint on anything that you want in my classes, okay? Since we are doing like a nice boxed frame for today's class, we are going to be using a little bit of acrylic, of painter's tape, sorry, can't talk today. And the acrylic paint will really stick and have a nice clean line next to this. So we'll be using this painter's tape to have a nice clean box for today's picture. And you'll also need a cup of water to rinse your brushes. And then you'll need a small plate to mix colors on. So I have a palette here that I'll use to mix colors. You could use a paper plate, anything goes. And then I always like to have a paper towel nearby, just in case there's any messes. You can kind of use it to wipe your hands off or if you need to clean your brushes. All right, so the first step of today's class is using your painter's tape to box off a nice rectangle to paint within. So you can make this as big or as small as you want. I want you to look towards the inside of this line here, and this is what's really going to help determine the width. Now you want this to be as straight as possible. I like to eyeball the width distance here to the width distance down here. If you wanted to measure to be like incredibly accurate, you can absolutely do that too. But my intent is to have a white space all the way around this box. So I'm just going to gently push this on with my finger. You don't need to push it on too heavily. And I'm going to do the vertical pieces first. And I like to match the width of this right side to the width of the left side, so this box looks even from left to right. Just take your time, line it up, do a gentle press. And I'm eyeballing it, so if you want it to be really accurate, you could do that. Okay, I'm going to go across the top. I'm going to look at the height of this line over here to this. Do a gentle press. And I'm going to try to get the same height here as the same height on the bottom. Now there's different types of painter's tapes you can use. You can play with which you use, but I'm going to do the same height or nearly on the bottom as the top. Again, this box could be any size that you want. And if you don't want to do the box, you don't have to. I love the way that it looks, so I'm doing that today. All right. So once you have your box in, you're going to paint the box in with a particular color. So the colors that I'm using today is I'm doing like a nice bluish green, maybe minty color background. And then I'm going to have lots of different colored green leaves with tiny little red and orange flowers. So for me, I'm doing a very delicate piece today, but we're first going to paint the entire background together. So this is where you get to decide what color you want your background to be. I'm going to recommend that you choose any light color of choice, like a blue, like a light blue color, a light green color. If you wanted to do a light yellow, you could do a light yellow. But I'm going to mix these colors with you, right here with you along the way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my white paint. I'm going to put a little dollop of white on my plate. I usually do about a thumbnail's worth, right about there. Put my paint down. I'm going to grab... since I'm doing a green, if you have no green, I'll actually show you how to mix this from scratch, just so you can kind of see. So to make a green, you have a little bit of yellow and a touch of blue. If you happen to have green, you can use green. If you happen to have teal, even better. Teal and a little bit of grass green color will actually make you a beautiful background color. So I have a little bit of blue and a little bit of yellow on my plate. Just mixing my yellow around. Okay, so then I'm going to take just a tiny corner of blue and I'm going to mix a little bit of blue with the yellow. And now this will give you a green. So just in case anybody doesn't have a green, I'm just going to show you how easy it is to kind of mix these colors on your own. Okay, so I'm making a green. So this is kind of a subtle lime green. And then once you have a green, I'm going to grab a dollop of the white and I'm going to bring it right into it. So it's going to immediately create a lighter green. Now you can add more blue to this to make it look a little more teal-like. So I'll do that here in just a minute. But for me, I'm going for a subtle color. So now I kind of have like a light olive green. Everybody's going to be mixing different colors. So I'm just kind of walking you through what I'm doing. Everyone's is going to come out different. I'm going to grab a little bit more blue on the corner of my brush and bring in a little bit more blue. This is going to give it a little bit more of like a teal color. You just have to be patient when you mix colors. It's really satisfying when you learn and you practice to mix your own colors, because then you can get the tones and the shades that you really like and enjoy. I'm going to grab a little bit more blue. And just take a few minutes to find a nice background color that you like. So this is getting there for me, but I do want it a little lighter. So I'm going to scoop a little bit more white to lighten this. So I'm getting a nice sage green color. If I wanted to make it a little bit more blue of a tint, I can add a little bit more blue. You can play with that. Okay. Now, I also have teal sitting next to me. I also have like green. I could have started with those, but for me, I like showing you the evolution of blending just for like educational purposes. There, I have this really pretty kind of bluish sage color. This is more so what I wanted. I might add a little bit more blue. And the process of blending also demonstrates just being patient with the process. Patience is one of the things that people have the hardest time with when they paint. I love this. I have a really pretty bluish sage green color, which is exactly what I wanted. But with a little patience, you can really find the colors that you want. All right, perfect. So I have this really pretty color. I'm going to paint the entire background. So I'm painting this, and it's not as light as I want it to be. So I'm just doing smooth brush strokes. Remember initially I said we really want this to be lighter, so I need to make this lighter. So what does that mean? How do we make a paint color a little lighter? We add a little bit more white. So I'm just going to move this paint around, just get this on. It's not going to hurt anything. But I'm going to take a little bit of white, and I could actually bring it right on here if I wanted to, which is kind of fun. And I could I could also lighten the paint on my picture too, or on my palette. So you can play around with this, and this is where you can have fun with a little bit of gradients if you wanted to within this box. Make sure you get all the way over to the edges. We want this to be a little lighter. Make sure your brush strokes are nice and straight. Sometimes people do like a little bit of a bend, like a rainbow bend. Try to be thoughtful to have nice straight brush strokes. I see those rainbow bends a lot in my classes. So you can see it's getting a little lighter. That's perfect. You could do a little bit of an ombre here if you wanted to. Again, we're just painting the background of this. You can go right onto the tape if you wanted to. Just do some nice smooth brush strokes. I'm doing a little bit of this green, a little bit of white. There's very little risk in this step, so I want you to have a nice light colored background to start. Nice smooth brush strokes from the left to the right. And you can see I'm going pretty quickly. I'm used to kind of going left and right pretty quickly, and the reason I'm demonstrating that is because I'm working the paint in to the canvas. And I'm painting on acrylic paper today, but no matter what technique or what subject you're using, that will be just fine. Okay. I'm just taking my time, doing some nice smooth brush strokes. The more you push and you work this paint into your medium, into your canvas today, the more smooth it will look. So I have a nice smooth transition down. We're going to be painting a lot of leaves and things down here on the bottom half, so the bottom doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. If you wanted to dip your brush in a little bit of water, you certainly could, but just make sure you get next to all these edges nice and cleanly next to your paint tape, because we're going to be pulling that. You can also dip your brush. I love a little bit of water, just a tiny bit will help kind of smooth things out where you need it. It's a little forgiving. We use this water technique in all of my classes. All right, so I'm just gonna kind of look at this and reflect. There's a couple areas of color that are not quite the same as the others, so I'm just gonna find some areas and blend those in a little bit better. But I want you to be happy with the background color that you've chosen here. I'm just doing some nice smooth brush strokes to kind of work in these colors. We're going to be painting over a majority of this, but it's important that you have a nice background to start and set with. I'm going to put a little water on my brush, and I'm going to see how these all kind of ended up kind of blending together. And you can say, is this light enough? And for me, I think it is light enough. If you wanted to add any kind of fun texturing, you could add some kind of like fun texturing. I'm going to blend this in, but I'm just kind of being a little playful right now and just showing you what it's like to add a little texture. You don't have to do this, but I'm just going to kind of show you what it's like to kind of bring in a little bit of texture here and there. And I'm kind of blending this in, which is okay, but you can kind of do some dabbing techniques. I'm just creating a little bit of extra brightness here and there, but you can play with adding texture if you wanted to. It doesn't have to always be just a flat color. And the nice thing is I love experimenting and showing people how to do different things in these classes, because it's That's when you come up with the really cool stuff, is when you're just playing around. Maybe you're adding some texture. I'm being a little playful just to show you what it looks like, but if you want just a plain flat color today, you can do that too. All right, so I'm going to give everybody just a couple more minutes just to wrap this part up. And I'm just going to kind of fade this texture down. I'm just kind of going left, right with my brush strokes just to see what happens. It's kind of fun to see different textures within here. And it also added a little bit of brightness for me. So I'm just kind of going all the way up to the corners. Okay, so I'm just playing with that. I'm going to let that dry. And then we'll slowly transition to some of our next steps. So if you wanted to clean your brush off in the meantime, we'll also start to blend we'll do some of our blood orange, red and orange flowers as our next step. But we're using acrylic today. Some of you might be using watercolor. I just cleaned off my brush well. Acrylic dries pretty quickly, which is quite convenient for these classes. Now, while this is wet, or if it's nearly wet, you can start to peel some of this paint off, the tape off, because now, as this is drying, we're going to be painting within, and we're going to be doing overflow painting for the next steps. So if it's like super wet, you can wait. Mine is like, it's still wet, but it's still fine to kind of pull it off. And I love the texturing I did. It just adds like a little bit of a different subtle like elegance versus just a flat color. You can see how it brings in a lot of different characters to it. I have a little light spot in the middle. Happened accidentally. It's okay. It's art. It does not have to be perfect. So don't ever worry about if something looks like imperfect. It's all good. But while this is finishing to dry and you peel your tape off, we're going to mix our blood orange colors together for our tiny little flowers. So this is a really fun part. Love this. So we're going to be using orange and red, yellow and red to make orange. So I have a little bit of yellow paint right here. I'm going to put it right on my plate. And I have a little bit of red. So I'll show you. I have a palette tray like this, and I left, if you have these wells, I have the yellow over here, I have a space, and then the red. To make orange, you're going to use a small brush of choice. Smaller the brush, the better. If I've ever mailed you a paint kit, I have a set of 10 brushes in our paint sets, in our brush sets. And this is a number, there's small gold numbers on the sides of these. This looks like a number 2. So it's a brush that has a nice fine point. I will be using a smaller brush for some of the more detailed work, but this is a nice small brush to start with some of those flowers. So we're going to be doing flower placement first, then we're going to be building in the greens, and then we can do some flower refinement. So we're thinking, I'm doing delicate flowers in the inspiration today. If you wanted to do bigger flowers, you could. In these classes, I'll always encourage you to kind of incorporate your own ideas. You'll never be judged. I will never judge you. This is all for a good time. So I'm taking this brush and I'm going to grab a small dollop of red and I'm going to mix it right within my yellow to make orange. A little bit of red goes a long way. I'll repeat that. A little bit of red goes a long way. So we're doing orange flowers first, and then we're going to be doing like the red accents. Now, there's a lot of different ways to bring in depth and highlighted colors. Orange is the base color of our flower today. And when you paint any object and you want to create depth, you want to create that 3D look, you add lighter colors and darker colors to create depth. That's like where the light hits, like the edges of the flower. That's where we use the lighter color. And then we use a darker color for the shaded areas. So for me today, orange is like my base palette color. So we're going to see how this orange stands out initially on our green. We might need to add a little bit of white to it, but we're just going to take things at one step at a time. The next most important thing is that your canvas should be pretty dry. If it's not fully dry, don't worry too much. With acrylic, when it's not shiny and it's fully matte in appearance, that means it's dry. If you see any shiny bits, that means those areas are a little bit wet. It's okay. So as we start painting our flowers, I want you to consider the size of the flower. Now, if you have a coin handy, or if you have an object, you can say, this is how big my flowers are going to be. Now, I could have a quarter, I could have a nickel, I could have whatever. I want you to think about the size of these objects. Now, for me, I'm going to do no bigger than a quarter size for a majority of these flowers. And I'm just going to start by doing just little petals, maybe finding the center. And your flowers all should be alike. So I did 4 simple petals, and this is about the size of a nickel. I'm just starting at this size, and my flowers are going to be kind of from the bottom half down. I'm going to sprinkle them in, and they're going to be small and large. So I'm going to do all these. This is going to be the biggest size, I think, and I'm just going to start just doing little outlines. Maybe these flowers all have 3 or 4 petals, and you just want them to kind of be all in the same family. Now, I might add a little bit of white to this orange. The white will kind of help stand out on top of this background. So I'm mixing a little bit of white with a little bit of my orange. And I like to spin my brush on my plate to have a nice fine point. So I'm just doing the outlines of these flowers. Maybe start to fill them in just a little bit. But these flowers are all going to need second coats, so it's just kind of getting them started. But I'm just going to start to put in like little buds. I'm kind of going a little impressionistic today, so your flower petals don't have to all be uniform. They can be different sizes and shapes. You can use the light orange, you can use the dark orange. We're going to bring these to life quite a bit, but we're just getting the basic objects down. And the goal is to keep this top left corner like free. We want the flowers to be on the bottom and kind of just coming up the left just a little bit. Now I'm going to be a little courageous and do a little bit of a flower coming off the side of the painting. This is kind of one of the magical things. And I'm really just doing little bits of flowers here and there. Maybe there'll be little clusters. And these are just small shapes. I just want you to use your eye. You can do different sizes. Some of the flowers can be pointing upwards. Some of the flowers can be downwards. And the reason I'm using like this lighter color so it will stand out a little bit more on the screen, but this will all kind of come together. So using a little bit of the white will help hold on top, and we'll make these flowers a little bit more red in color too. So I'm going to put in like little buds along the way. We're really kind of building a little beautiful little array of flowers. Some flowers can be a little bit more tight knit. You could tuck in some smaller flowers along the way. If you wanted to mix a little bit of like red and orange to start bringing in some of the darker colors, you could. This is just all going to really help stick. I'll bring this a little closer for you. There we go. So I'm really just doing a fluttering of flowers. You can go back and forth between the lighter colors and the darker colors if you want. Just don't want you to lose shape of those petals. And we're going to have lots of green in here. So all these gaps where you see, I'm doing some little flowers tucked in. So pretty. You could use the darker colors if you want. Just kind of go with the flow here. Try to change the angle and the sizes. You can see I'm just doing an array. And they're all different sizes, which is kind of fun. And then you can see I'm keeping this whole top corner up here. empty. And I'm building these flowers here. Now, I'm not going to go too crazy off the bottom here. Maybe I'll put a little cluster of 3. 1, 2, 3 right here. It's fun to put little clusters in. Again, I'm playing with mixing red and oranges together. You can see I have little bits and pieces. You can leave some green gaps. Like, you don't have to put flowers absolutely everywhere because we're going to have lots of green in here too. But I like these little clusters. This is a 1, 2, 3 cluster right here. And I'm just doing kind of rounded lines for these petals. It's good to kind of think outside the box when you are painting like this because we're going for the overall form. We're not going for just like the look of one particular flower. We're doing it from like a reflective perspective. And these might just look like a bunch of random little lines. Yes, they totally are, but they will look like flowers when we're done. So we're just going to slowly start to, you're going to do maybe a little bit of outlining with some of the darker color. You can do, and you can grab a smaller brush too. But we're going to start to do a mix of filling in these flowers. And I'm going to grab a smaller brush and I'll show you exactly what we're going to do with some of the outlining. This will allow you to refine your flowers. These flowers are going to take lots of coats of paint, so just take your time with this. It's enjoying the process along the way here. And take a deep breath. Don't forget to breathe. Enjoy the moment. All right, so I'm going to grab a smaller brush. And we'll start to fill these flowers in together. So I did some just basic forms. I'll bring it really close. It's very simple, but you can see visually kind of where my flowers are going to live. I can always add more flowers, but it's good to kind of hold some of those green spaces because we're going to tuck in lots of leaves. All right, I'm going to find a tiny brush of choice here, or one at least with a really fine point on it. This one is fairly new and it has a nice point on it, and I can always find a new brush if I need to. So it's okay, you don't have to have like the best supplies. Just try to use, for this class anyways, try to use a brush with a nice fine point, because what we're going to do is we're going to pay attention to the tip of the brush as we fill these in. So I am making a kind of mixed blood orange color here, and this is an important color. So it's like a dollop of orange and it's a dollop of red, and I'm mixing those together right here. And this is kind of a nice intermediary color. A little bit more orange. It's kind of like not an orange, not a red, but a nice in-between color. Okay. So these flowers are going to be layered with an orange and a red. So what I want you to do is you can consider maybe outlining your flower. If you have orange already, maybe outline the orange with a little bit of this red. Just for your flowers to really start to jump out. And I'm using this blood orange kind of mixture. And this is where you can start to highlight some of the orange petal work that you already did. See that? That was a great example. So it's fun to kind of layer around and then come back and refine the shapes that you've already created. And some of your flowers might get a little bit bigger. Guess what? That's okay. This is art. We just kind of roll with things. We don't take things too seriously. We're just kind of outlining, and you can, if you need to reshape a flower, if you need to add a new petal, using the tip of this brush, I'm paying attention to the bristles on the tip of this brush, and I'm rolling this brush on my palette to have a nice fine point, and I'm just highlighting the work that I've already created. And this is where the flower character really starts to come through. Now, if you want to approach this differently, feel free. You're not going to hurt my feelings. art is really just about following your own intuition. I'm here just to support you along the way. And you can see these little flowers are just starting to appear. Pretty cool, right? Now maybe you have a lot of red in areas and you're saying, Megan, I really need to bring in a little bit more orange to some of these flowers. You can do that. Anywhere you have too much red, you can bring in orange. So I don't even have to wash my brush. I can just go in, grab a little bit of orange on the tip of my brush. And down here, I'm missing a little orange. So I can come in and I have orange and white mixed together. So that's an important thing because it just holds the pigment a little bit better. Just gives it a little bit of a sorbet color too, which is kind of fun. So I'm just tucking in a little orange on some of my red flowers. So this is where you can really start to kind of fill your flowers. And this is a base coat for these flowers. We're going to add other colors into these little flowers. This is just a starting place. So with today's class, it's really, we're paying attention to the evolution of the flower detail as a group. But this is a great way to practice and exercise being intentional of what colors you're adding and watching and seeing what happens as you kind of use one versus another and holding space within these petals for different colors of flowers, different colors within these flowers. So you really just, the goal of this step is just to fill these flowers in. So there's no white on the inside of these flowers. I want there to be a little red. I want there to be a little orange. And that's what's going to show each of these petals. So if some of these flowers have 2 or 3 petals, and it's really rough right now, and that's okay. But this is all a starting point. It's not going to look perfect out of the gate. And it's good to talk about that so we kind of manage our own expectations with the class today, right? And if your colors are getting a little mucky, that's when you kind of put your brush down and you just pause and you let that area dry, because we don't want you to blend the red so much it turns into the orange. You want the red and the yellows, or sorry, you want the red and the oranges to kind of stick next to each other. And then you can start to see, well, if I add a little bit of a lighter orange here, it will really start to hold and start to build upon. So these flowers are going to be built on with lots of layers, especially since we started with that green background. Okay. So at any point during the class today, you need to pause the video. Feel free to do that. Everyone works at different speeds. I've taught hundreds of art classes, and I just want you to know that I want you to always go at your own speed. Don't feel rushed in these classes, because I'll always be here to help you and support you to get you through it. But I want you to be able to pause the video if you need to. So for me, I am going to let this dry. We're going to add a lot more paint on top of these flowers. But my initial goal of just filling these in initially, I don't want to see any teal within these flowers because we're going to do more work to these after. Because you can still see it in through some areas, but it's got to dry to add more. Okay. So continue to paint these flowers so you see no background through them, or at least if they need to dry, like a first coverage, that's perfect. I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to pause on these flowers, and we're going to transition to doing some leaves as some really beautiful contrast. So while my flowers are drying, we're going to go back to them, but we're going to do some nice leaf contrast as a next step. So I'm going to clean my brush, and we'll be mixing 2 tones of green, dark forest green, and some other tones. We'll be playing with maybe even 3 tones of green today. And we're going to use this tiny brush too. And this is where the contrast is really going to come in. It's going to be quite beautiful. So the intent is we're getting some of our basic placement together for our flowers in. Awesome. I did lots of little flowers. I'll bring it a little closer again. I did some bigger flowers, some little flowers. I kind of scattered them throughout. But all this green space that I have in between is where we're going to put our leaves next. All right. So I'm going to mix a dark green. Again, I'm going to pretend like I don't have any green. So I'm going to show you how to do that again. So to make green, it's yellow and a touch of blue. So I'm going to make my green first. So here's my yellow and here's my blue. I'm going to take a dollop of my blue and put it right within my yellow. Mix that together. My flowers are drying. They're thinking about their future. And we're just shifting. We're shifting to a green. So if you have like a really mucky green, you are going to add more blue. The more blue you add, you'll see that hue change. Nice. Now I'm getting a little bit more of a grass green, which is perfect. Find a green that you like, because we're going to kind of, based on how much paint you made, we're going to split this in half and we're going to make a darker version. So for me, I want to make this a little bit more of a blue hue to it. So I'm just adding a little bit more blue. And it's fun to watch the colors change. One of the best parts about art is using colors that you enjoy, but having the patience to kind of make that color too. This is a beautiful grass green. This will be an excellent highlighting color for my leaves. So I made quite a bit of this paint. I probably have a solid quarter's worth, and you'll learn pretty quickly in my classes. You don't need a lot of paint to do your art, especially if you're using a small canvas. So I'm going to take a dollop of this, and I'm going to kind of put it over here, and I'm going to add a little bit of black with it, and this is probably a solid nickel or a quarter size worth of paint. It's probably bigger than a nickel. But you can see I mixed this here and I brought a little bit over here. This is like a shamrock green, which I think is a nice color. I can always change it if I want to. And I'm going to grab my black carefully and do a very small dollop of black just in a clean area of your plate. You don't need a lot of black. Like a dime worth of black is enough for this part. You won't even use all that. So I did my dollop of black right here. I'm going to take a tiny little bit of this and mix it with my separated green. I'm making a forest green color. So a little bit of black. You can just start making it darker. I want it to be darker than that. You want to be able to see that it's still green, but it stand out from a contrast perspective. So for me, it's not quite dark enough yet. So I'm just slowly adding a little bit of black at a time to get it to the right shade of green. So when you add black to a given color, and the color is green, which is actually called a hue, you're adding black and it's called a shade. So I'm creating a shade of green, a shade of this hue. And that's a little bit better, right? So you can see that this is a darker green than my original. So that's a good start. I might add a little bit more to get a little risky. To go for a deeper forest green. I love the deep forest greens in this inspiration. So this is good. This is good. It's not too dark. It's really a mild forest green in person. So I'm going to spin my brush so it's not too goopy with paint. Very important. Paint management, as I like to call it, is important. So you kind of manage what's on your brush. So I kind of spun the brush on the side of my plate to manage the amount of paint. And there's still quite a bit of paint on here. And this is going to allow me to start doing some of my petals. And if you want to get a little bit more, you can. These petals are going to be all different forms of a leaf shape. So a leaf shape can be wide, it can be pointy. I want the sizes to all be fairly the same, but imagine you're looking at a tree. Not all leaves are the exact same shape as you look at it. Some leaves are kind of blowing in the wind, which means they might be sideways, they might be turned, they might be pointing to the left, they might be pointing to the right. So I want you to use the tip of your brush and just pick one flower. And if you wanted to, do little stems, you can. I'm not. I'm just going to start doing little leaves, kind of tucked in. To start building the scene. Now I'm doing little dots and dashes. I want you to use your imagination. If you wanted to put in lines, you could. I'm up here on the top kind of row of flowers. I'm going to keep it pretty airy. But the greens are going to get more dense down here in the bottom right corner. So it's kind of like, imagine a rose bush happening. And then these are kind of like the sprigs kind of coming out from the top. So imagine this is like a sprig of a flower coming off the top. So I want you to be a little bit more airy with your petals. We're going to get a little more dense as we work our way down. You can use the tip of your brush to kind of form and fill. So I'm just doing, my petals are kind of faced upwards. I'm doing some skinny petals. I'm doing some dots and dashes just to fill in this space. And they're not touching. You can see some of them are floating. We can have some of them touching, but I'm being mindful to have some of these be a little bit more, I'm creating a little more air by having them not all touch. But they're going to touch as we get further down here, right? That's the bush. This is where we're going to create that scene. Now you can always add in more flowers on top of the greenery if you want to. But I just want you to play around with starting to layer in some of these petals. And as I get in here, some of these are going to start to touch each other. And I'm leaving some gaps because we're going to tuck in other colors in here as well. So we're going to tuck in some other green petals and we're going to layer them in. But as you start to work your way down, you can start to really bring in these different colors. And you can see I'm leaving like a little bit of buffer room right now, kind of around some of these flowers. Some of your leaves can kind of come off the page. That's the kind of fun part of the box, the boxiness. I can use the brighter green to kind of come in closer. So we're going to use 2 or 3 tones of green to kind of fill in this bush area. But I'm using this darker contrast to really get us going here. And maybe we'll even maybe you outline some of the bottoms of these flowers. You might even want to make some like darker contrasting greens. But do some small dots and dashes, do some petals. Change the direction of your brush from the left to the right to kind of fill in this space. And you can see the scene is really starting to evolve. So just take a moment to kind of witness what's happening. It's so beautiful. And I'm leaving little gaps because I'm going to tuck in more green after. But I'm getting really condensed. We want there to be more of this dark green down here on the bottom. Now you can decide for the bottom area down here, I'm keeping the green kind of within the box. I'm having just a little spill and flow below. You can decide where you want to go outside of the box and not. But I'm going to try to keep it down here within this corner. I might put like an overflowing flower down here. We'll see. But I'm having overflowing up here and over here. So I might, you can play with where you want to add this or that. But this is where you just have patience. This is a beautiful process. Our flowers are drying, which is preparing us for some of the next flower steps. You could do a couple, maybe a 1, 2, 3 leaf kind of coming off over here. Use the tip of your brush. Try to imagine sprigs. You can do thin lines, you could do thick petals. This is greenery, right? This is foliage within this picture. So you can do little lines, you could do dots. You can see I'm still holding some space here for a lighter green. I'm going to grab some of the lighter green just to show you what it's like to kind of bring in that secondary color. And I'm just going to start to fill in some of these areas just to show you. what this looks like as it gets a little bit more dense. So I'm starting over here in this corner, and you can see I'm using this grass green, and I'm just adding in this lighter area. Now you can decide how much you fill in or not. It's totally up to you. You might have a little bit of that background color coming through. We will add some highlighted areas to these leaves. So mine is fairly impressionistic. If you wanted to do actual leaf shapes, I'm doing lots of different shapes per se. I'm going for like overall composition of a flower in a bush. Or this could be a tree, it could be anything that you want it to be. You can layer upon. You could do little lines, you could do actual petals, but just know these shapes can change. So if I do a little bit of a green leaf, maybe over here coming off, you could do these very particular leaf shapes so you can see them, which is kind of fun in certain areas. But this is your time to really just build out this space. And again, as you work your way up, you can be very deliberate about how much of this. This is where it looks really beautiful, weaving in lighter green with the darker green. If you need to make your lighter green lighter for it to stand out, you absolutely can. But we're going to go back to these flowers, and this is where these flowers and the two contrasting colors really start to jump out. So just enjoy the process. Lean back in your chair, reflect on where you're at. Say, are my colors right? Is my darker green dark enough? Is my lighter green light enough to be able to appreciate this? And I'm keeping these up here fairly airy, but I still am putting a little bit of green up here. So I have some nice spacing in between these flowers, right? There's like a little sprig that's happening here. I want this to be fairly filled in this corner. I'm doing a nice balance of color of my dark greens and light greens throughout the entire painting. And I'm being intentional about the overflow. So the overflow of these flowers on the right, the overflow on the left. For me, that's balanced. I like it. Think about where you might want to add a little bit of darker contrast. And you can always pause and kind of switch gears. So for me, I was very thoughtful to add like a lot of darker contrast down here. I could certainly make it more dense in my inspiration. It was more dense, which means there was less background showing through down here. So I liked that in the inspiration. So I'm going to come in with my darker paint, and I'm just going to make it a little bit more dense, aka grounding this kind of this bottom corner. So I'm coming in with my darker green, dancing around the lighter green because I still want to see that and appreciate that. But see how I just grounded that whole bottom corner? But I want to make sure it still works. So it's just being thoughtful of what you want to add and where. And then it gets airy. It gets airy by there's some lightness of the background starting to show through these, okay? Now you may need second coats on some of these leaves, especially the ones that are kind of overflowing on the sides. So that's evolution of this art. You can do that after, but just go as long and as far as you want with filling this in. Light and dark greens. For me, I'm looking at this saying, I think I'm pretty happy with my base coats of these colors. I'm going to pause For you as the artist today, I want you to take as much time as you need to do this base coat. But when you're ready, feel free to pause the video, but when you're ready, you can continue on with me. Now that I am kind of happy with the base color of the darks and greens, I'm gonna go back to my other flowers to really bring those to life even more. So in this class, we like to kind of do one layer, let it dry, work on another area. So layers and colors don't get mucky. It's really important to kind of shift to one area to another when needed. So if you need to stretch, grab a cup of tea, feel free to pause the video at any time to check on yourself. We want to make sure you're comfortable and happy during our classes. This is a really wonderful time for us to just be ourselves, practice creativity, and enjoy the time and space. So I always like talking about that and making time for everyone. So I'm going to go back in and look at these flowers. I want to maintain dark contrast and lighter contrast. One of the things I'm going to do in addition to the colors I have for these flowers already, which is an orange, I have a little bit of white and orange mixed here. That's some of the lighter areas that you see. I mix this blood orange color here, and then I have red. Well, I'm going to make a dark red color for some special accents. So I'm going to take a dollop of red over here. I did 2 dollops, and I'm going to take a little bit of black on my brush, and I'm going to make a darker red tone. This is going to allow me to add some beautiful shaded areas to the undersides of these flowers that will really make them pop. So I have a really beautiful brick burgundy red that I'm using. And this is going to be used on the underside of some of these flowers just to highlight the petals. If you wanted to do it on the edges of these flowers, you can, but this is just a really nice way to complement some of the details within. So I may outline some of the petals. I might do the underside of some of the flowers. If you wanted to do kind of layers within, you could use this to kind of highlight the edges of the petals for consideration. So you can see I did that over here. I kind of did outlines of the petals. Some of these flowers are kind of pointed upwards, so I can kind of outline the position of the petals and the position of the flowers. You can do as much or as little of this kind of dark layering work as you wish. But we're going to come back in with our other colors to really brighten and to warm things up. Because you can always paint over some of this darker contrast. This is just a nice way to kind of ground the flowers in the painting. And it'll really make them stand out as we put in some of the lighter colors. So you might see where you did some darker colors before. Maybe you are going to kind of highlight some of those areas. Maybe you don't have enough contrast. It's going to be different for everyone. You can see I'm using it just as like a tool to shape maybe some of these areas. You don't need a lot of it. We're still going to make these flowers as bright and bold as you want. These flowers can also be like dark and moody if you want them to be, with some just a little bit of lighter accents. So you can make some of those choices as the artist today. Just lean back and reflect on where you want to add that contrast. Also consider the size of your flowers, and you have a variety of size. Now, the variety of size is, do you have some tiny little buds growing in the distance? Do you have some bigger and smaller flowers? I've taught a lot of these classes, and a lot of beginners typically have a lot of the same size flowers. So if you want to add a little dimension, a little bit more of a natural look, I would consider you adding some of these smaller flowers too. Like I have just little bits of these colors tucked in, and me visually, Those look like smaller flowers that are still growing. Like this one's really big and this one's big, but we have some smaller flowers that are growing along the way. That will help make your scene a little bit more natural for consideration. All right. So in the inspiration, these flowers were like all fairly dark in color. I like this like blood orange kind of color. So for me, these flowers, you can kind of start filling in the petals. You do want to hold some of the lighter space, and we'll add some lighter space at the very end, but try to fill in these petals in a way that you want like the true color to come out. So I'm not filling in the flower entirely, but I'm adding just enough color to the interior of these petals for like the color itself to be clear. So some of these flowers are a little more orangey. Well, I want to make them a little bit more red. So that means I'm going to kind of put a little bit of this reddish orange in some spaces. I'm going to hold some of the oranges and hold some of the lighter areas. But I want to make sure that these beautiful colors come out. So you can see here, I made these a little bit more of that orangey red, which kind of looks pink in zoom, but it's like a blood orange kind of color. But I see those darker outlines and I see some of those oranges coming through the background. So I just want you to kind of bop around from flower to flower with whatever color you want, just to make sure they're filled in a way that you like. So are they vibrant enough? You also might want to add another flower or two in some areas. I'm going to do that after. I'm going to kind of see what I have first and then go back and reflect. You could certainly do that now if you wanted to, but I'm just looking at my flowers. Are they red enough? I like the red against the blues and greens. It's really quite pretty. Just lean back and reflect on the picture in its entirety. Think about where you might need a filler of color. So for me, I just did a couple of tiny red dotted buds on this stem right here. You can tuck in a little color intentionally. I'm not going to do too much of it. I think I have a nice balance of color. For any flowers that are kind of overlapping the edge, you can always do an extra coat. And you might need to go back and get a little orange. If you need to go bring in some of the orange, you can. So take your time here. Again, feel free to pause the video if you need to. You can bring in a little bit of a peach to kind of highlight. I'm going to be using a little bit of like a light orange to do some highlighting. So a little bit of white, just like we did the dark red, you can use a little bit of orange and white, which I'm mixing now. And you can add a few little highlighted spots on these flowers that will really make your flowers kind of pop off the screen here. So the more white you have, the more it's going to stand out. So you can kind of outline the edges of some of these petals. I did some highlighting over here. You can do as much or as little of this as you wish. Again, my flowers are really impressionistic. They're turned and tilted in lots of different ways. If you want your flowers to kind of stay darker and like you don't need this brightness, you don't have to if you don't want to. If you paint something you don't like, you can always cover it up. For me, I put a little bit of this white down here. I don't really like it, so I can go paint right over it. So it's okay to like take a little bit of a risk to see if you want to try something. Try it in one area. If you don't like it, then paint over it. It's okay. Maybe you want to bring in a little bit of pink on your flowers. That would be a lovely addition. But take your time, go at your own speed. I love the pink, and I'm just playing, and I'm not cleaning my brush in between. I'm playing and blending the colors right on my palette. The pink is a great complement to the reds and the oranges. And if you're losing sight of some of these petals, use that red, that dark red, to outline and hold that space for consideration. And for me, I'm just going to kind of ground some of the bottom of these flowers, maybe with a little bit of dark green, like they're at the bottom of the plant, kind of like there's large kind of green leaves at the bottom. So any way you kind of want to connect these to your stems, that's all for consideration. Kind of lean back in your chair and say, do I want to add anything else? You're going to know, though, when you're happy with an area, don't overdo it. And that's a little tricky in this inspiration. I'm going to recognize that right up front here. All right. So you can go as complex or as simple as you wish with today's inspiration. I could go a little higher and add a couple more sprigs. Considering it, maybe a couple more little sprigs of flowers kind of coming up, like I just added some gentle leaves. Use your eye. You could add another leaf or two. These leaves had a little green, a little pink and green on them, which is quite funny. But the tips of your leaves, they could be a little more pointy. You can refine any of your leaf shapes with a little bit of playing with the end of your brush. You can have a little bit of a point on the end. But do as much or as little as you wish here. If you have any specific questions about this video, please feel free to drop them in the comments below. I would love to see your artwork after. I encourage you to email me and share your artwork. I always love seeing your progress. Be sure to sign the bottom of this when you're done. You can grab a small black pen or a Sharpie. Anything that you have will be a great addition. Makes it look so professional with your signature down at the bottom. But I hope that you love this inspiration today, and I hope you enjoyed the process. If you want to continue painting to refine your work, I encourage you to do that. But I want to thank you so much for joining me and making time for you. And I do hope to see you again in the future. Take care.